retaliate with its own tariffs on American goods. Mexico is the largest trading partner of the U.S. And Dogecoin shot up 20% after Trump announced Elon Musk will help lead his new Department of Government Efficiency, or Doge for short. This meme coin, which Musk has promoted, is one of the biggest winners in the post-election rally, gaining more than 150% since Election Day. That's compared to Bitcoin's 30% rise. And Starbucks, making it easier to get your pumpkin spice latte delivered right to your door. Starbucks will now let customers order a delivery right through its own app, eliminating the need to use a third-party app. The new feature goes into effect this week. It is powered by the delivery app DoorDash. I guess we didn't know we needed it until it happened.
So many things are like that, right? Yeah. Alexis, thank you.
Sure.
And if you have any finance questions for Alexis, just leave a message on our Instagram feed at ABC News Live. She might answer your question right here on Thursday. Coming up, the Colorado man literally paying it forward, why he's leaving cash around the state for strangers to find.
Let's do it. My name is Luke Bryan, and with the help of today's biggest star, we're going to explore everything country.
Let's go! Going out on stage live, watching the crowd react. It's magical.
And once you've been there, it is a drug.
When you got kids, it's hard to write about anything else.
I told my fans everything.
When everybody brings their story, it really becomes something special.
Yo, partner.
We're not partners. I'm the detective and you are the consultant. I see you brought your baby to a crime scene.
She is just spectating.
You're a single mom with 3 kids pretending to be a cop.
I am not pretending. I spot things that detectives miss. Still think my theory's flimsy?
That big brain of hers is going to help us close a lot of cases.
I'm just out here super copping.
High Potential, all new Tuesday on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Why do so many people start their day here?
From ABC News, this is Start Here.
To be in the know and get a different take on the day's top stories.
A lot of news today, so let's get into it.
Listen now to the Daily News Podcast honored with 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards and see why the New York Times calls it a news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, ABC News. Make it your daily first listen.
Now, that's a part of the story I bet you didn't see coming.
Wherever you get your podcasts, Start Here. David Muir, ABC's World News Tonight, the most watched newscast in America, and honored with the Emmy Award, winner for Outstanding Live News Program. More Americans watch World News Tonight with David Muir than any other newscast.
What's good to watch, read? Where can I get a great deal on what I'm just dying to buy? Oh, it's all right here. GMA Life. Get the latest celebrity buzz, deals and steals, and the coolest lifestyle tips from GMA.
I love that so much.
Streaming weekends on ABC News Live.
What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
We are part of an operation.
Is this our Combat Operations Center?
We're approaching the gate. Militants came in from...
Hi, appreciate you.
Thank you.
Ismael?
David.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir is America's most watched newscast.
I'm at Gutman in Ventura County, California, where they're still trying to put out this massive fire. Wherever the story is, we'll take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Welcome back to ABC News Live. First, a Colorado man is literally paying it forward in celebration of National Kindness Day. He's traveling around his state, leaving cash in places for people to find. He also says he's planning to continue his generous deed on his work trips. ABC's Danny New has his story.
On this National Kindness Day, we are headed to Colorado, where a mysterious guardian angel has been giving away thousands of dollars in cash all over the state.
At least $100 a day is my goal.
He is known as Miracle Man, and since July, he has picked the town every day to just drop off cash multiple times. He prefers to keep his name private, but on Instagram, the Miracle Man will just post a clip of a covert but recognizable location. And then folks immediately go out and treasure hunt.
Put it towards bills, whatever, groceries.
Not surprisingly, Miracle Man's page has amassed more than 100,000 followers in a short amount of time. But time is part of the reason he's been giving away so much. You see, he's not only called Miracle Man because he donates a lot of money.
What happened?
I had a sudden cardiac arrest and was dead for 15 minutes.
In 2013, he had a heart attack while at the wheel of his car, and as you heard, was eventually pronounced dead for 15 minutes before miraculously waking up in the ICU. But while he was out, he says he got a visit from his older brother, who had died a few years earlier.
He put his arm around me, like around my shoulder, and he said, "You have a lot to look forward to. Enjoy your life."
Now a quote-unquote miracle man, but still experiencing problems with his heart, he would spend the next near decade trying to figure out how to honor what he calls his second life.
It can be taken away from you so quickly. Why not go down sharing what I've got?
In the last 4 months, he estimates he's given away more than 20 grand. And while he says he does have a successful business, it all comes from his pocket. He says he wants to help people, but he also wants to build a community.
Just doing my part, whatever I can do to make a difference.
Danny New, thank you for that. And thank you for watching. I'm Diane Macedo. The news never stops, and neither do we. We have a lot more news for you after the break. Stay with us.
This ship is heaven. There should be no guilt on a pleasure cruise. Doctor, it's your job to keep everybody alive.
No pulse. She's in VFib. 1, 2, 3. Clear.
I have a pulse.
You're gonna be okay.
The news never stops. We are here in Israel, a nation at war.
Hurricane Helene
Screaming across the state.
And that's why ABC News Live never stops.
Taking you to the center of the story as news breaks live.
ABC News Live is there for you all morning live.
Right there, as events unfold across the day, breaking down the day's top stories. ABC News Live Prime going there, wherever the story is.
and ABC News Live lighting up the weekend.
ABC News Live.
Because the news never stops.
One great idea can change your life.
That's what Shark Tank does.
That's the American dream right there.
This collie is for my kids.
What you've done is remarkable.
One of the most innovative things I've seen in my life.
This could be our biggest deal ever.
I want to be on a team with you.
Shark Tank, new Fridays on ABC and stream on Hulu. Whenever news breaks,
We are here in Israel, a nation at war.
In Rolling Fork, this tornado tore through this town.
Kristen, Maine.
The scene of a horrific mass shooting.
From the scene of that deadly missile strike.
Wherever the story is.
We're going to take you there.
ABC News Live.
They're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live, streaming free everywhere.
Here at this massive sinkhole after Hurricane Milton made landfall in Florida, I'm Jacqueline Lee. Wherever the story is, we'll take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Hi, I'm Diane Macedo. Let's get right to our top story. President-elect Trump has a busy day in Washington today. He's heading to a meeting with President Biden at the White House after speaking to congressional Republicans near Capitol Hill. And this after announcing more key picks for his incoming administration. He says Elon Musk and his former Republican rival, Vivek Ramaswamy, will head a new Department of Government Efficiency. He's also tapping Fox News host Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense and former Trump Director of National Intelligence and Republican Congressman John Ratcliffe as incoming CIA director. Let's bring in senior White House correspondent Selena Wang in West Palm Beach, Florida, White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks, and ABC's Jay O'Brien in Washington for more. Selena, what do we know about how the incoming administration is taking shape? Any more news on that front?
Yeah, Donald Trump is moving at breakneck speed to install loyalists around him, people who he trusts, who've been around him for years and who he believes are going to carry out his demands. So he just announced a whole slew of senior White House appointments. These names do not come as a surprise. These are people who helped Donald Trump on his campaign. They had key campaign advisory roles, and some of them even served in his first administration. So let me just read to you some of these names that just were announced. So Dan Scavino, he's going to serve as Deputy Chief of Staff. Stephen Miller will be serving as Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Homeland Security. James Blair, Deputy Chief of Staff for Legislative, Political, and Public Affairs. And Taylor Budowich, who will be Deputy Chief of Staff for Communications and Personnel. Again, these names are not surprising. These folks, in fact, are currently traveling with Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. But what has come as a surprise announcement, Diane, is the announcement of Pete Hegseth as Donald Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense. Defense. Hegseth is the weekend anchor for Fox and Friends. He is a U.S. Army veteran, but he has no government experience. And as Secretary of Defense, he would be overseeing the Pentagon and 1.3 million active duty troops. And Hegseth could bring about sweeping changes to the military. Just days ago, he said that he believes women should not serve in combat roles. And he also called the Pentagon's message of diversity as strength, quote, garbage.
Now, Jay, you spoke with Trump's pick for incoming national security advisor. What did he tell you?
Yeah, I just spoke with him moments ago, Diane, as this meeting that Donald Trump addressed House Republicans at was wrapping up. That speech, by the way, that Donald Trump gave, largely just a campaign victory speech, a yay, rah, rah speech, a speech in which he says he's got unified Republican government because Republicans captured the Senate. They appear poised to hold on to power at the House, and they believe that that is a mandate for Donald Trump's vision for the future. But I spoke with Mike Waltz, Trump's pick for national security advisor, as he came out of this meeting, and I asked him about what Selena was just talking about, Pete Hegseth, and does he have enough experience given the fact that he's never served in a senior military leadership role or a senior role around national security or defense largely? Does he have the experience to lead the Department of Defense? Here is what Mike Waltz said.
Yeah,
Congressman, does Pete Hegseth have enough experience to be Secretary of Defense?
Pete Hegseth is great.
He's never served in a leadership role in the military, in the DOD, or anything like that. Does he have enough experience?
He's never served in a leadership role. We get taught to lead from day one. At 18 years old, we're taught the basics of leadership.
Would you like someone who's had more, general experience in planning DOD or something?
Look, I think the president's made a fantastic pick.
Can he get confirmed by the Senate?
What's that?
Can he get confirmed by the Senate?
Yeah, absolutely.
I
don't even know why that's in doubt. Thank you.
So Waltz there pointing to Hegseth's leadership when he was in the military a few years back when he was serving in that military role and now a veteran. He was saying that he was taught to lead, from his early rank onwards from 18. But he has, again, never served in a senior DOD role, never served in the Department of Defense, never served in any kind of leadership capacity in those various national security worlds or roles. Nonetheless, Mike Waltz, of course, incoming to Trump's national security advisor, says he thinks it's a good pick, Diane.
Mary Alice, what are you watching for at the White House now ahead of this meeting between President Biden and President-elect Trump, especially given they never had this traditional meeting after Trump lost the election in 2020?
I mean, you think about the words that these two men exchanged about each other. I mean, at the end of the campaign, we heard Democrats call President-elect Trump a petty tyrant, a fascist. Of course, President Trump on the campaign trail called Biden the worst president in U.S. history. How remarkable that these two men will be in the room together. President Biden has said that this is important for the American people, that it's not about Trump, not about himself, but the American people. And frankly, he would argue sort of the world, I think, for people to see this moment of a very visible display of trying to make sure there is a peaceful transfer of power in this country. Like you said, of course, Trump 4 years ago did not extend such an invitation to President Biden, never conceded his election, didn't attend Biden's inauguration. I think what's going to be really interesting is what we learn, of course, about what the two men talk about. We know that from our White House sources, including the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan just last weekend, said that Biden wants to use this opportunity in part to kind of make his case, why he thinks that U.S. support of Ukraine should continue. Of course, that's an area where there could be a huge and very fast divergence in Biden's foreign policy compared to Trump's foreign policy, and where he is sort of proud of some of his record. I'm imagining that Biden's going to want to talk about things like some of the infrastructure spending and projects that are already underway, some of the healthcare initiatives. I mean, this is a moment for Biden to basically try to argue some of his point of view to President-elect Trump before he turns over the keys.
Jay, what else are you hearing from Republicans in the House after this meeting with President-elect Trump?
Well, there was a sense, again, Diane, of this mandate that Republicans say they have that validates Donald Trump worldviews and his policies. I just talked to Marjorie Taylor Greene as she was emerging from this meeting as well. She talked about the size of this win. She talked about the size of Trump's electoral college win, also the popular vote. And I asked her, what does that mean for change in Washington? Because both she and Donald Trump have been people who have long said they do want to change Washington. How drastic is that change? What does it look like? And Marjorie Taylor Greene wouldn't go into specifics. All All she instead said was, look at Donald Trump's campaign policies, the promises that he's made. And she essentially said that's their blueprint going forward. So we're talking about policies and priorities and promises like mass deportations, significant tariffs, those all the way to even things that RFK has said and promised that if he gets the quote-unquote control that he claims Donald Trump promised him over, various federal health agencies, that they would try to take fluoride out of the water. We don't know exactly what Donald Trump's worldview is now that he has gotten into power. Some of these might just be campaign trail promises and not necessarily make their way all the way to the White House. But I can tell you, Republicans I talk to say they want to engage on all the promises, on all of the various policies that Donald Trump laid out, because they believe the size of this win means that that's what the American people want.
All right, Selena Wang, Jay O'Brien, Mary Alice Parks, thank you. And President-elect Trump has made a number of key appointments in the week since winning the election. ABC News executive editorial producer John Santucci is here with more on this quickly assembling Trump administration. John, what are you hearing from Trump's inner circle about how these decisions on appointments are being made?
It's really interesting. So we're not seeing what we saw 8 years ago of, the show and tell, if you will, right? People coming to Trump Tower, Donald Trump greeting them by the elevator, people going to Bedminster, getting the handshake upon arrival. This is all being done in secret. And what the transition team has done quite effectively, you could argue, is they built out these portfolios for Donald Trump. So he comes into the transition office at Mar-a-Lago in the morning, Diane. They basically press play on a tape. And what the tape does is it lays out, here are your options of people we vetted for these positions. Lays the pros, lays the cons. And from there, after they've gone through that presentation, it's sort of like opening the door and saying, come on down for your interview. They're knocking this all out in private. Everybody that has gotten a job so far that's been announced has met with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Pete Hegseth was there earlier this week. I don't know if he really expected to be Secretary of Defense. It was a surprise to many people in Donald Trump's orbit. But nevertheless, it does show that this is being done with speed. As one person close to the president-elect said to me, they believe that they think they could get this all done maybe by the end of this week. And so far, that does appear possible. They have filled out much of the cabinet, 14 positions announced so far. They just announced much of the senior level staff for the White House, filling out all of the deputy chief of staff roles, in addition to incoming White House chief of staff Susie Wiles, who's with the president-elect today as he makes this trip. So it is actually just interesting to juxtapose it, if you will, right, to 8 years ago, how it took a little bit of time, with several weeks, was a slower process. It does show that the team and the president learned a lot since they went through this and want to get it done quickly.
I also want to ask about Elon Musk, because many were surprised to hear he had joined the call with Trump and Ukraine's President Zelensky last week. Yesterday, we heard him reveal that he wants Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to lead up this Department of Government Efficiency. And now we're learning he actually traveled with Trump to Washington today. So what are you hearing about their relationship?
As one person said to me, Diane, wherever Donald Trump is, Elon Musk is. Elon has literally been living at Mar-a-Lago, going back and forth a little bit, to do other business matters that he has, but pretty much there. He was on the golf course with Donald Trump on Sunday, hanging out with his grandchildren. I mean, he's almost becoming an extended member of the family, you could argue. Now, let's be clear. At this moment, it does not seem like this new agency, if you will, it's an outside government agency, like an outside
They're calling
auditor.
it a department, but they say it's an outside advisory task force.
Correct. So, and that's a great way to explain it, right? It's an outside auditor, I would call it, right? So I don't exactly know what it will look like, but clearly Donald Trump has put two people that have, walk the walk to now talk the talk, right? I mean, actually go and do what he's wanted with gutting the federal government. So that's what they're going to be tasked to doing. But I think that what's interesting about Donald Trump, right? Like, we talk about the evolution of him as a politician and as a president. There are certain things that have been more aligned and sophisticated, if you will, with the operation. Talking about the transition, talking about Susie Wiles as chief of staff, which has given many Republicans and Trump allies some calmness, because she has run a great ship for the campaign. You can't deny that since they won, and obviously everything leading up to that. But bringing people like Elon and RFK, it does suggest that still there are the Trump tendencies. And I think for some in Donald Trump's orbit, they know there's nothing he could do about it, right? He likes Elon around. He likes RFK Jr. around. So in the world of let Trump be Trump, let him have his fill, let him be around those people, and we'll see what actually happens. I do think it's interesting because Elon not taking a job in the administration formally is, I think, a little bit of foreshadowing what comes with RFK Jr. I don't think he gets a formal role. Maybe some czar-like role, but we'll see. That's still being figured out.
And what about the other administration appointees? What do you make so far of these picks, and what do they tell you about Trump's priorities in the coming administration?
Well, I think the fact that the first ones out of the gate were immigration, I mean, take Donald Trump at his word. Immigration's going to be day one. We know they're already building out executive orders and policies and procedures. Installing Tom Homan to come back in this czar-like role and Stephen Miller to come in a deputy chief staffer role, I mean, case in point, right? These are two people that are hardliners on immigration, and we're right there with Donald Trump executing his view years ago and have been echoing much of the views for the last several years campaigning with Donald Trump. As far as some of the other appointments are concerned, it's a bit of a head-scratcher. I mean, I think the big one so far that has caught many by surprise is Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. But I think where you have to look at Donald Trump, you know, guy doesn't change. Think about Donald Trump when he first went on the presidential campaign trail. He said to people that he got his information from the shows, watching the Sunday shows, watching cable TV. Pete Hegseth is on cable TV. He's someone that Donald Trump likes, gets along with, has a relationship with, you know, has probably talked to about the military. Hegseth's been hosting many shows talking about the military and foreign affairs on Fox News. So though it's surprising, don't think of it that way. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't change. I think what'll be interesting, though, is that as you start to see the job and who surrounds them, I mean, what do they fill out the other levels of that with? Because there's deputies, there's chiefs of staff at the Department of Defense. What does that other infrastructure look like? I think that will actually be quite telling as well.
All right. ABC News executive editorial producer John Santucci. John, thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
I want to bring back ABC's Jay O'Brien in Washington, along with senior White House correspondent Selena Wang for more as we await President-elect Trump's arrival at the White House. Selena, how significant is this moment, both for President-elect Trump and for President Biden?
This is a huge moment. I mean, there is bitter feelings between these two men, and President Biden has called Donald Trump a threat to democracy. This is someone who he fundamentally believes is a threat to the ideals that this country was built upon. And now he has to hand over the keys of power to the president-elect. This is not the legacy that President Biden wanted to leave behind. But look, he clearly wants to show the world, show the American people that he is committed to its smooth transfer of power. This is, of course, something that Donald Trump did not afford President Biden back in 2020. Now, we also know that President Biden is going to be making his pitch to Donald Trump for some of his key domestic and foreign policy priorities, especially around Ukraine. President Biden's national security advisor said that Biden is going to be explaining to Donald Trump that he's got to stay by Ukraine and that walking away from Ukraine could lead to more instability, both in Europe and around the world.
Jay, what are you hearing from lawmakers about the priorities for the coming administration, and how do you expect that to come up in this meeting?
Diane, I'm listening to you. We're just also following a lawmaker who seems to be walking away from us. He just left us. Okay, forgive me. We're out here trying to grab members of Congress, and now we've lost one. But to your question of what we're hearing from members of Congress, A, the size of the win, of course. Secondly, they believe that's a mandate, of course, when I refer to the size of the win. The other thing that we hear often is this question of what does Donald Trump's influence look like now? Meaning that Donald Trump has captured the White House. He has helped drag Senate Republicans to a Senate majority there, because while it was always expected to a degree that Republicans were to capture the Senate, there were some long shot candidates that Donald Trump helped win just by his sheer vote count, his sheer influence. And then lastly, he was able to put Republicans in the House in a position where they appear poised to hold on to their majority in that chamber as well. And so the question becomes, Donald Trump has taken credit for and can be credited to some degree, I've heard Republicans say, with some of these various wins. And therefore, does he exert that influence to essentially get whatever he wants out of a Congress that, when he was first in the White House, wasn't necessarily...
And Jay, we are now expecting President-elect Trump to arrive at the White House any moment. We're going to toss it over to our special report.
Good morning. We're coming on the air because we're about to get our first look at today's White House meeting between President Biden and President-elect Donald Trump, the two sitting down in the Oval Office just a short time ago. This is Donald Trump's first time back in the White House since he left Washington in January 2021. There has been no shortage of harsh words, obviously, from either side for the other. President Biden inviting Trump to the White House after his election victory over Vice President Kamala Harris. There was no White House meeting after Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump in 2020. President Biden committing to uphold the peaceful transfer of power. This meeting comes as Donald Trump moves quickly with his transition team at Mar-a-Lago, building his new administration. He's already filling top positions, including naming his chief of staff, deputy chiefs of staff, UN ambassador, and Homeland Security chief. Last night, he also revealed Fox News weekend host and Army veteran Pete Hegseth as his choice for defense secretary. We also know Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy will play major roles in the new administration, creating the Department of Government Efficiency. It will likely exist outside the federal government with its expected focus to cut many government agencies. President-elect Trump has vowed on day one to rescind a number of President Biden's executive orders, including those concerning immigration. As they meet in the White House, Republicans on the Hill, meantime, are deciding on new leadership in Congress, who will be the next Senate Majority Leader, with Mitch McConnell stepping down. Before arriving at the White House, President-elect Trump meeting with the House GOP conference. He congratulated them on the election, saying, "Isn't it nice to win?" On Capitol Hill today, Senate Republicans are expected to vote on that new Senate Majority Leader. Florida Senator Rick Scott, a staunch Trump supporter, is up against Senator John Thune and John Cornyn. Trump has not publicly endorsed any of them. President-elect Trump will take the oath of office a little more than 2 months from now. Let's go to the Oval Office. We'll look at the pictures here in just a moment. This is President Biden, obviously, and President-elect Donald Trump, the invitation extended by Biden. Let's look. Here we are, right?
Thank you. Donald, congratulations. Thank you very much. And looking forward to having, like we said, a smooth transition. Do everything we can to make sure you're accommodated, what you need. And we're going to get a chance to talk about some of that today. So good. Welcome.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much. And politics is tough. And it's, in many cases, not a very nice world, but it is a nice world today, and I appreciate it very much. A transition that's so smooth, it'll be as smooth as it can get, and I very much appreciate that, Jim.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
You can't blame them for not trying. They're the reporters in the Oval Office asking questions of the President-elect Trump right there and of President Biden, smiling at each other, but not taking the bait, if you will, any of the questions inside that room. You heard President Biden say to the President-elect, we want to make sure you have a smooth transition of power. We're here to help you with anything that you need. The President-elect saying politics is tough, that the world is not a nice place, but it is a nice place today. Certainly appreciating the extension from President Biden to make this transfer as peaceful as possible. Let's bring in our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, also watching these images as they're coming in. And Mary, as you look at the image, it's quite notable. President Trump did not extend this courtesy 4 years ago when Biden beat him. President Biden, in an effort to strike a new tone moving forward, extending that invitation today.
David, this is something we haven't seen in 8 years, and yet the president felt it was very important for the world to see this, to see these images, and for him to be able to reiterate and underscore his commitment to a peaceful and smooth transition. And it was clear, I was in the room there as the pool reporter today in the Oval for that, and it really felt like both the president-elect and the president, after this bitter, hard-fought campaign, were really trying to bring down the temperature there. As you noted, Donald Trump mentioning, look, politics is a tough business, but they are trying to move forward. And it is interesting to hear Donald Trump there in this meeting, a ritual that he did not afford President Biden 4 years ago, but saying that he appreciates this outreach, that he appreciates moving forward for a smooth transition ahead, David.
Mary, stick with us. I'll come back to you in just a moment. John Carl, you're also watching along. I know you were there when then President Obama extended the invitation to the president-elect Donald Trump for his first term in office.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, these are two moments that are extremely rare in the life and career of Donald Trump. Two moments where he is not the person driving the conversation. He is not the person who is convening the meeting. You see, Joe Biden there welcoming him, short, gracious remarks and short and gracious remarks from Donald Trump. Very similar to what we saw almost exactly, David, 8 years ago when Barack Obama invited Trump to come to the White House. Back then, it was just 2 days after the 2016 election. And a very similar scene at that point. Donald Trump actually said that he would be seeking counsel of President Obama as he started his administration. And I asked him a question at the time, and it was the one question that was answered. I was like, are you really going to seek counsel from Barack Obama? And he said, yes, he would. And I'll tell you, the graciousness didn't last long back then. It was another obviously bitter campaign. We'll see how long the graciousness lasts this time.
John Carl, I appreciate it. Let's get right to the Hill. Rachel Scott, a lot of news on Capitol Hill. The president-elect was there just a short time ago. Now, of course, at the White House with President Biden. That's the spray from the beginning of the meeting. I presume the meeting continues between the two, President Biden, President-elect Trump. But significant for a number of reasons at the White House. Also significant his visit to the Hill just a short time ago.
Exactly, David. Before that face-to-face meeting between President Biden and also President-elect Donald Trump, the president-elect was here near Capitol Hill. He was meeting with House Republicans behind closed doors. And I'm told right off the bat, you had Speaker Johnson acknowledge that the coattails, in his word, were enormous, that not only having President-elect Donald Trump at the top of the ticket for Republicans got them the majority in the Senate, that they believe they are inching closer to a strong majority, although it may be small, over in the House. I am told by multiple members who were in the room that the president-elect also praised Speaker Johnson. He also said that I suspect I won't be running again unless you say he's so good we've got to figure something else out. Multiple members inside that room told me that was intended to be a joke, that several people also chuckled in that room as well. But of course, just on the other side of the chamber, you have Senate Republicans who will be electing their new majority leader right now. This is a Republican conference that is going to be strengthened with President-elect Donald Trump at the White House. And as this is all playing out, David, also House Democrats meeting for the first time behind closed doors. And in his very first acknowledgement, Leader Jeffries did acknowledge to House Democrats that he does feel that it is very unlikely that the House is going to flip in their favor. He says that the buck stops with him, and he looks forward to trying to retake the majority back in 2026, David.
Yeah, the math looks extraordinarily difficult. Looks like the Republicans will hold on to the House as well. They'll control the Senate and, of course, the White House. One of those rare moments in Washington when all three are under the same party. Rachel, thank you. Quite a split screen from 24 hours ago. I want to go back to this image from just yesterday. Vice President Kamala Harris returning to the White House for the first time to have lunch with President Biden, and she was greeted by hundreds of workers at the White House and the old executive office building. Let's listen to the Nat sound here for just a moment. It happens every 4 years. There are winners and losers in these presidential elections. She thanked the team gathered there, and she said there is still a lot of work to get done, but that she was grateful for their support. Mary Bruce, any reporting on the lunch between President Biden and the vice president, the words that they might have shared?
Yeah, this private meeting between the two of them, this luncheon, the first really extended time that the president and the vice president have had alone together since the election. The White House, not surprisingly, not reading out too many details of that. This was a private conversation between the two of them. The vice president, we know, is back at work. She's meeting, we are told, with staff and aides today. She notably is not a part of this Oval Office meeting today. You can imagine that would have been a bit uncomfortable. And the White House stressing today is really about a chance for the president and the president-elect to meet. But it was hard not to look at those images yesterday and see that she clearly was touched by the outpouring of support from her staff, and yet stressing there's still a lot of work to do, David.
Mary, thank you. Let's get back to the pictures of the moment, the news at this hour. Again, President Biden meeting in the Oval Office with President-elect Donald Trump. The president extending his hand right there, and the invitation to the president-elect, a courtesy that was not extended 4 years ago. President Biden saying in front of the cameras, we are here for a peaceful transfer of power to make sure you have everything you need as you enter into your administration. President-elect Trump saying politics is tough. He said in many ways the world is not a nice place, but it is a nice world today in that moment with President Biden. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live, abcnews.com. I'll be back with the entire team for World News Tonight. I'm David Muir in New York. I'll see you a little later today. Have a good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Power through your day.
And you're watching ABC News Live's special coverage of President-elect Trump meeting with President Biden at the White House. We saw President Biden congratulating Trump, pledging a smooth transition, and Trump agreed, saying politics is sometimes tough, but that is a nice world today, expressing gratitude for the invitation and for the promise of a smooth transition of power. I want to bring in senior White House correspondent Selena Wang for a little bit more on all of this. Selena, what message is President Biden trying to send not only to America here, but really to the world with this meeting?
Diane, I really think it's the image of Donald Trump and President Biden shaking hands there in the Oval Office. It sends a strong symbol to the American people in the world that there will be a peaceful transfer of power in the United States. Now, remember, President Biden had extended this invitation to President-elect Donald Trump as part of the tradition. This is something that Donald Trump did not afford to President Biden back in 2020. So the last time we really saw imagery like this was 8 years ago, when then President Obama had invited Donald Trump into the White House, into the Oval Office. And what was really fascinating here was to see these two men who have such bitter animosity, had such a bitter rivalry out on the campaign trail. They were smiling, shaking hands. President Biden making clear that he would do everything he could to help him with this smooth transition. And Donald Trump expressing gratitude. I just want to read you a little bit of what he said. He said, politics is tough, and in many cases, it's not a very nice world, but it is a nice world today, and I appreciate it very much. It is just hard to underscore how personal things got between these two men out on the campaign trail. Donald Trump with very harsh words towards President Biden, calling him the worst president in history, and President Biden repeatedly saying that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Now you see him shaking hands with that man, handing over the keys of power. Certainly not the legacy that President Biden wanted to leave behind.
And ABC's Jay O'Brien is near Capitol Hill, where President-elect Trump met with House Republicans before heading over to the White House. Jay, what are you hearing from lawmakers there about how that meeting went?
Well, we're hearing unity. It was largely a campaign-themed message from Donald Trump, not running, of course, but talking about the size of his electoral college win, talking about his win in the popular vote, his ability to help Republicans capture control of the Senate and appear poised to hold on to control of the House of Representatives. And there was this notion in the room of this level of unified Republican government. I've heard Republicans come back to this over and over and over again, that Donald Trump has the White House, he has the Senate, he appears poised to have the House for Republicans as well. And now it's their time to enact their vision for the country. And I've heard some Republicans say, look, now is our time to deliver on the various promises that Donald Trump and other Republicans have made to the American people over the last few years. And now they have to go to work and do the things that they promised. But also there is this sense of optimism in the Republican Party. I mean, there were congresspeople walking out of this meeting where Donald Trump addressed them, high-fiving each other and things of that nature. So Republicans are very, very, very optimistic about their next few years. It remains to be seen if that optimism, if that level of party unity that comes off this win holds, or if some fractures that we've seen in the Republican Party of the past reemerge. Nonetheless, there is that sense of optimism at this hour. And there's one other thing I keep hearing Republicans come back to, Diane, is that this is a different Washington than when Donald Trump first came to Washington in 2016, the first time he won. There are more lawmakers loyal to Donald Trump now than there were back then. As you and I have frequently discussed, there are lawmakers in Congress now, a large majority of them, frankly, in the House Republican Conference, for instance, who either were endorsed by Donald Trump or went to their districts and ran on the fact that they're ideologically aligned with Donald Trump. Some of them have their entire political careers to thank from Donald Trump. Point being, there is a loyalty in the House and in the Senate from some lawmakers to Donald Trump that just wasn't there the last time Donald Trump came to Washington. So there is this sense that Donald Trump will be able to use that to exert even more of his will than he was the last time around, where he got a number of things through Congress. For instance, tax reform, things of that nature. Also had some losses, too. Couldn't overturn Obamacare and stuff like that.
And John, I want to bring in our Chief Washington correspondent, John Carl, for a little bit more on the color here, John, because we have seen this contrast at times where these two have obviously gone at it on the campaign trail. But we heard Trump sort of talk fondly about Biden when he said that the president had called him after the assassination attempt on his life. And again, when he talked about Biden calling him to congratulate him on the election. It's one thing to see them go at it like that, another thing to literally see them shaking hands in the same room. What do you make of that image and what this meeting represents, especially given we didn't see it 4 years ago?
Well, on one hand, it's almost entirely routine when you think about American history. You know, the vanquished and the winner coming together after an election, you know, agreeing to work together on a transition, and you know, promising that it'll be a smooth transition. But this is anything but routine. I mean, this was not simply a tough campaign. When you think about how personal and how vicious the attacks were coming at both of these two, I mean, Biden being hammered by Trump and Trump's allies as the head of the Biden crime family, the vicious personal attacks on Joe Biden's son, Hunter, just absolutely central to his campaign, not just this campaign, but the campaign in 2020. So to see the two of them together, and then obviously Joe Biden talking about Donald Trump not simply as somebody he disagreed with, but somebody who is a threat to the Constitution of the United States, a threat to American democracy. So on one hand, it is entirely heartening to see that even after those the viciousness of that campaign, and frankly the last campaign, to see the two of them come together, shake hands, and have very short but nonetheless a series of pleasantries and talking about a smooth transition. I have to tell you, Diane, it reminds me very much of what happened almost exactly 8 years ago. It was 8 years ago this week, when Donald Trump came to Washington and went to the White House for the very first time, 2 days after he beat Hillary Clinton, and he was welcomed in by Barack Obama. And you had very similar expressions of goodwill from both men. It was a little bit longer back then, the remarks. Donald Trump at that point, I asked one question. I was in the Oval Office for that. You know, are you going to seek his counsel? Because he had suggested in his opening remarks that he was going to continue to want to get Barack Obama's counsel as he put together his administration and started his administration. And he said yes, he would. And they both said like all the right things. And it was within a matter of days when you were right back to where it was. You know, and shortly after Trump actually became president the first time, he made accusations that Barack Obama had wiretapped his phones, entirely unfounded accusations. So look, it's very nice to see what we saw today. We have seen something very much like it 8 years ago. We will see this time, you know, if it follows a similar trajectory, or you know, if we're in for something entirely new. We'll have to see. But that was after that campaign, that has to be at least at this moment a reassuring moment to millions of Americans.
And I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, as well, because Mary, on the one hand, traditional, on the other hand, so different, even though one of the players here is the same from what we saw 8 years ago. So what do you make of how different this meeting will be compared to the last time we saw it between Trump and Obama, given Trump never ran against Obama? This campaign actually started with Donald Trump and Joe Biden competing against each other for the presidency, and we all know how it ended.
Yeah, the tone already is starkly different. I have to tell you, I was actually in the Oval Office as the pool reporter just now for this handshake and those brief remarks, and it really is such a stark contrast. I mean, I just don't think you can stress it enough. These are two leaders who certainly don't get along on pretty much anything, but here they are coming together, finding common ground on the need for this smooth transition, something, as we've been noting, Donald Trump did not participate in the last go-round. But to hear him there say, look, politics is tough. It can be a difficult business, but that they are both looking forward to a smooth transition. And President Biden felt really adamant that this was important, for the symbolism of it, important for the nation to see these images, to see, this is democracy at work. That is something you have heard Joe Biden say in recent days, that it is important for him to reiterate his commitment to a transition and for Donald Trump to reiterate that as well. But certainly, a stark contrast to the tone that we have heard. I mean, when you consider the fact that the last extensive FaceTime the two of them had was on that debate stage, that debate, of course, that ultimately led Joe Biden to drop out of the race. Now, of course, the president is going to likely use this meeting as an opportunity to also impress upon the incoming president some of his key issues, especially Ukraine. We expect to be an issue that Joe Biden brings up. He feels very strongly, not only for his legacy, but also for global stability and security, that the U.S. keep up the fight for Ukraine against Russia's brutal invasion. So that's at least one issue that we know they're going to hit on. But just the body language between the two of them, just remarkable to see them there, shaking hands after this very bitter and hard-fought race.
And I want to bring in our senior congressional correspondent, Rachel Scott, too, because, Rachel, despite those conversations, how much influence can President Biden have on President-elect Trump, given the way this election panned out, not only for the presidency, but for the Senate and what it looks like will happen with the House as well?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, this is a picture and image that we did not see 4 years ago when President Biden won the White House. There was no then President Trump greeting President Biden. This decades-long tradition just did not happen. And so, as Mary stated, this is a picture of democracy and how it works. And I think President Biden, by extending this invite, obviously it is meant to send a signal to the American people that win or lose, there has to be a transition of power. Now, as for President-elect Donald Trump, he is going to be emboldened. He's going to be strengthened by a strong and solid Senate majority here over in Congress, and maybe possibly even likely a razor-thin majority over in the House as well. He was meeting with House Republicans over on near Capitol Hill earlier this morning. Speaker Johnson, I'm told, started that meeting by saying that they were all sort of strengthened by the coattails of Donald Trump and him being at the top of the ticket. And so that is going to be paramount, because that means that by having both chambers of Congress, we have seen it in previous administrations, even during President Biden's very first year in office, that is your opportunity to try and push through your agenda. And Republicans here on Capitol Hill, they are making it clear that they are behind the president-elect.
And I want to bring in our executive editorial producer, John Santucci, too, for a little bit of color. Because, John, what are you hearing from Trump's inner circle about this meeting? Because I do see his team is fundraising off of it now.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting, though, is that they're fundraising off of it, but at the same time, as I was sitting here, the Harris campaign sent out a fundraising email to, basically pay down some of their campaign debts. So everybody's fundraising at this. I mean, listen, it's not too surprising. I mean, Donald Trump's team wants to keep the hype going. And listen, they still have a lot of things they need to do if you think about it. One of the things that I was talking with colleagues of ours this morning, Diane, is that, look, in addition to a transition, they're also starting to plan an inauguration. That also brings in big donors, big money, big events. And a lot of that we saw 4 years ago was not the same, given we were in the middle of a pandemic and President Joe Biden didn't really do much. Donald Trump, in his first win, had a huge inauguration. I think it's going to be a little smaller, but nevertheless something interesting. Look, I think what today is showing a little bit is discipline, Donald Trump. What I think is actually interesting, if we could just zoom out for a second, Donald Trump won every battleground state, and we haven't heard from Donald Trump. This is the first time we saw Donald Trump since, Wednesday morning, technically, if we want to get into the clock. I think I was half dead by that point, but like 4 in the morning when it came out, 2, 4, something like that. I don't remember. We haven't had much sleep. But the fact that this is the first time we see him and he says absolutely nothing, stays right on message, disciplined. I mean, you got to give credit. They somehow can keep it together. He's with right now a very small contingent of staff that are joining him for this tour. Some of them know their way around the building, like Dan Scavino and Stephen Miller, who were with him 4 years ago when he was in the White House. But for Susie Wiles, this is the first time that she's back at the White House since serving at the Reagan administration. She was a scheduler back then. Now she comes back as incoming White House Chief of Staff, the first female to hold that position. So Donald Trump already making waves.
And I want to bring that point to John Carl, because John Trump knows his way around the White House, clearly, but a lot of his new administration will not. And we are getting a long list now. He's going through this pretty quickly to assemble who's going to be joining him there at the White House. What do you make of his pick so far?
Well, you know, it's been a little bit all over the map. First of all, the most striking thing is how quickly he is filling these posts. It's quite a process that he has underway. Howard Lutnick, the head of Cantor Fitzgerald financial firm, has been making presentations to Donald Trump for all of the top cabinet picks, and it's something that mirrors very much, if you ever watched the show The Apprentice, how it's worked. He presents Donald Trump with a series of screens. On a series of screens, he puts the talking points for what makes this person a good candidate for the job. Then there's another video screen that has a montage of television appearances, interviews on cable TV and the like. And then there's just one that just has a big photo of the person as Trump tries to visualize whether he could see that person in his cabinet. Do they come, as Trump often says, from central casting? But if you look during the, for the initial postings, some of them seemed entirely mainstream, the kind of picks that you could see in really any Republican administration. Susie Wiles, obviously as the chief of staff, somebody with some pretty deep experience in Republican politics. Michael Waltz, who is the national security advisor, a former special operations veteran and member of Congress, who's pretty widely respected. The nomination hasn't been formally made, but we hear Marco Rubio is the choice to be Secretary of State. You could have imagined Marco Rubio in the cabinet of a Jeb Bush if he had been elected president. But just the most recent appointment, we had Pete Hegseth for Defense Secretary, and it seems that his primary the primary reason he was chosen is because Donald Trump likes what he's had to say on Fox News. He's the weekend host of Fox and Friends, the morning show on the weekend. He is a combat veteran, 20 years in the military, but not somebody that was on anybody's list of a potential defense secretary, somebody with no government experience outside of his experience as a member of the military. So the picks are kind of all over the map. I think the one thing that unites all of them is these are people who have demonstrated their loyalty to Donald Trump. You have Kristi Noem named as the incoming or the nominee to be the Secretary of Homeland Security. Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, gave Trump a gift once. It's a model of Mount Rushmore, which of course is in South Dakota, and it's the model of Mount Rushmore with the 4 faces and a 5th face added of Donald Trump. And that model is something that Trump has at his office at Mar-a-Lago on display. So again, people that have proved their loyalty to Donald Trump are at the front of the line right now for all of these positions, both the mainstream picks and some of those that are a little bit outside of the mainstream.
And I want to go back to Selena Wang on someone who is not at the White House today. Melania Trump, the soon-to-be First Lady again, decided not to go along for this trip and have a meeting with First Lady Jill Biden, which the invitation was extended to her. But Selena, you say Jill Biden did write a note for Melania Trump. What are you hearing about that?
Yeah, so we're learning from the White House that First Lady Jill Biden had joined President Biden in greeting Donald Trump, and Jill Biden handed a letter to Donald Trump that is intended to be for Melania Trump, and in this letter she wrote about helping and doing everything she can to help Melania Trump with the transition. Now, as you mentioned, we've reported that Jill Biden extended an invitation to Melania Trump, but that Melania Trump declined that invitation. It will be interesting to see how Melania Trump approaches her role as First Lady. Back in Donald Trump's first term, she often went against tradition. But this is something that Melania Trump has done before. Back in 2016, Michelle Obama had hosted Melania Trump at the White House. But of course, this time around, it is very, very different. As you've been talking about, Donald Trump knows this role. He knows his way around the White House. Melania Trump knows what her role entails as well. But Donald Trump, of course, is coming into this role now emboldened. He's got the American people's mandate. He's got the support in Congress, and we are seeing him rapidly install all of these loyalists around him. It is clear that Donald Trump is prioritizing loyalty above all, especially over experience. Now, some of his picks, including Marco Rubio, which reportedly he is intending to name as the Secretary of State, as well as his national security advisor, that gives some comfort to some Democrats and those who want to see more establishment folks. But then you see other people like Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense that are raising some alarm bells.
All right, John Carl, John Santucci, Selena Wang, Mary Bruce, thank you all. And we will have continuing updates right here on ABC News Live throughout the day. Thanks for joining us. I'm Diana Macedo. We have more news for you right after the break.
Whenever, wherever news breaks, it's so important to always remember that lives are changed. Here in London, in Buffalo, Uvalde, Texas, Edinburgh, Scotland. Reporting from Rolling Fork, Mississippi. Ukrainian refugees here in Warsaw.
We're heading to a small community outside of Mexico City.
Getting you behind the stories as they happen. ABC News Live Prime. We'll take you there.
Stream ABC News Live weeknights wherever you stream your news. Only on ABC News Live.
3, 2, 1.
It's a 24/7 life together.
It's not about the fear or the risk. It's about the love of flying. 3, 2, 1.
When you're 61 years old, you have very few opportunities to change your life. This time, I have to be ready. This is about everybody like me. I see a future, which is not what I felt like for a really long time. I don't feel invisible now.
My name is Luke Bryan. Country music is my life, and I want to share it with y'all.
Music was always kind of my escape.
It's magical.
You're dating that detective?
I'm not dating anyone.
Just friends, but it's complicated. That's the best kind of relationship.
Reporting in the aftermath of Hurricane Milton in Fort Pierce, Florida, I'm Eva Pilgrim. Wherever the story is, we'll take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
We are part of an operation.
Is this our combat operations center?
We're approaching the gate. Militants came in from...
Hi, appreciate you.
Thank you.
Ismail, David.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir.